Welcome back to This Week. Time now to get the views of our media and political experts. Mike Kopp, Vice President of MMA Creative and a Democratic activist, and syndicated conservative talk show host Steve Gill. Welcome, guys. A busy week as always, and really busy this week. Just a couple of days ago, the Senate confirmed Sonya Sotomayor to be the newest Supreme Court justice. Not surprising, the Democrats had the vote. A little surprising, I guess, that 8 Republicans decided to cross lines and vote for her.
I think that when you look at the numbers of those who did the crossover, it wasn't really surprising. You've got Judd Gregg, who's retiring. You've got George Voinovich, who's retiring. You've got Olympia Snowe, Susan Collins in Maine. I mean, when you kind of go down the list, there really wasn't a surprise of those who've crossed over. It was pretty much the gang of 8 that was blocking conservative judges under George Bush. Lamar Alexander was a bit of a surprise that he crossed over and voted for Sonya Sotomayor at a time when Bob Corker did not.
Well, I think what's interesting is the Republicans were saying that the world would end if she were nominated. That didn't happen. So.
And now she's confirmed.
She's confirmed, and there we go.
The danger doesn't come until she gets in and starts issuing rulings. And since about 2/3 of her rulings at the Court of Appeals level turned out to be wrong, according to the Supreme Court, that's where the danger comes in.
Former President Bill Clinton this week made headlines as he was put in the spotlight again, bringing 2 American journalists home from North Korea. My understanding was it was highly synchronized in that the former president, could only deal with this issue, nothing else, and that he was specifically asked for to come and do this. So it was great the Americans got home, but it was pretty choreographed, as it were.
Well, it was a photo op for Kim Jong-il. That's what he was wanting, was that FaceTime with the president. He got what he wanted. And we don't know whether there were any side deals, whether any other back alley, back channel communications were started. The good news is the 2 girls are home. I think the bigger question still is, what were they doing going into North Korea, and what are we going to do for future people who go into countries like Iran? We've got 3 hikers right now that are there. Is Bill Clinton going to go get them, or do we only use this kind of discourse when it's a journalist involved?
Of course, they're claiming they weren't in, or if they were in, they didn't know they
didn't realize they were in. And I think we need to go ahead and give President Clinton the credit he deserves for it. I mean, it's a humanitarian move. He didn't have to go do that. This is a president who doesn't need that kind of attention, and he did it. And everything that's coming back that we know is that there were no side deals cut. I mean, it was pretty straightforward. He went in there and asked for their freedom, and that's what he got.
Any downside for the Obama administration to have him go do this as opposed to maybe the Secretary of State?
Well, I think it's hard for the Secretary of State to be dealing with the country when we have so many other issues on the table, and I think they handled it correctly. I think this is a president who can come in and do those kind of things, and I hope that they use presidents as they have Jimmy Carter, and this is not the first time we've seen this kind of thing happen over the years.
When you've got countries like this, like Iran, where you don't really have formal relations, you really can't use the Secretary of State. You really can't use official direct lines, and I think that Bill Clinton is an avenue to get this one done. Again, the question is, where do you draw the line? I mean, you've got 3 parents that are very worried about 3 hikers that are being held by Iran right now. If you don't provide the same, we'll pull out all the stops to save them. We've got an American soldier under some strange conditions that's missing in Afghanistan. Where do you draw the line of when you pull out the big guns?
No, that's a tough question. The Senate this week also, a lot of money approved, $2 billion more for the Cash for Clunkers program. $1 billion has already been spent. You heard car dealers, you heard Lee Beeman. Obviously, it is bringing people into dealerships. Cars are being bought, but there are some concerns. The dealers haven't gotten their money yet. And do you continue this program once this $2 billion is spent?
I'm not sure there's enough clunkers that qualify. There are a lot of details, and unless the car is worth less than $4,500 and then still also meets a lot of qualifications, you can't trade it in. Are there that many more cars that people are going to be able to bring in and get more value than it's worth in order to buy a new car? And as John McCain was pointing out this week, what's going to be next? You know, cash for refrigerators, cash for big screen TVs. When we start picking winners and losers in the economy based on giving free money to people, I think we're going down a bad course of who wins and who loses. We pick your industry, we don't pick mine.
The stimulus did work, though, didn't it?
It did, and I think this is an unusual case because we have automotive dealerships that are in these rural communities, and in many cases it's the only major employer in a lot of these cities. So the government had to do something to help these businesses stay afloat. You'd have major employers in small towns all across America shutting their doors.
The big concern, as Lee Beeman was saying, they hadn't gotten their money yet, and always slow coming out of Washington, but they will get it eventually.
Well, they will get it eventually, and I would imagine smart business people like Beeman would know that when you're working with the government, there are going to be delays on these kind of things.
Well, it was also sold, though, as an environmental issue, that we would save the environment. Well, the amount of mileage increase that we're getting from these trade-ins, in some cases as little as a 1 mile per gallon, 2 mile per gallon increase. versus the cost of producing new cars means that this is really a net loss for the environment. So it was also couched under not only a stimulus but also under environmental savings, and that's really not the case.
Well, I think the emphasis was more on the jobs, though. It was really kind of keeping people employed and making sure that these dealerships were staying afloat.
Another tax-free weekend in Tennessee this weekend. Good news for consumers, bad news for the state. It means less state tax revenue, and the new numbers in this week show that the state is down another $56 million, more likely layoffs coming.
Well, politically, this is one of those things where any elected official cannot change that program. I mean, it's there. The people have supported it. It's important for a lot of families at this time of the year. I think Governor Bredesen said it well. This is one of those conflicted issues. We know we probably can't afford it, but what are you going to do in telling those families that right now when they have to make those critical buying decisions that all of a sudden they can't?
That's the problem with every government program. Once you start it, you can't get rid of it. That's why we need to be very careful about starting any and every program.
And there was bipartisan support for this. So, I mean, if there's any blame to be,
people's pockets.
Blame goes around to everyone on this.
There's real concern, too, with the continued downturn in the economy, especially in sales tax returns here continuing to be down another $56 million, and they're saying, look out, next year is going to be even worse. If they're going to be laying off even more and more people, this is really going to have a detrimental effect on government services. Things are going to be slowed down when you try to get your tags renewed, all kinds of issues.
The fact of the matter is that the elected officials are going to have to look elsewhere as opposed to going back on their commitment to this program.
I was talking with State Senator Doug Jackson and Representative David Shepard at a meeting earlier this week, and they were pointing out that while this is bad news, the real bad news looming down the pike is that we were able to cover over a lot of shortfalls this year with stimulus money. In 2 years, we go over a cliff because that money's just kind of bought us time. It hasn't helped fix the problem. We've got to turn around the economy. We've got to turn it around quick, not just in Tennessee but in the United States, because that looming cliff is just ahead, and it is not going to be pretty.
Steve Gill, Mike Kopp, appreciate your insight. Stay with us. This week continues in a moment.